That day, I got home early. Due to a schedule conflict, the Dallas Quarterly Board Review was abruptly canceled. Additionally, I didn't feel the need to go to the workplace in order to continue being productive for the first time in months. I wanted to do something straightforward and everyday. I went to that little cafe on the street that Belle adores, the one that sells expensive organic muffins and cinnamon chai that she claims tastes like home. I even remembered to request no foam and almond milk, because you ought to be aware of those things after 15 years of marriage. When I entered the house, it was silent. Not dead, but also not quiet. No children were fighting over the remote, and there was no music. No Belle humming as she folded laundry. As I made my way to the kitchen, I could only smell the subtle aroma of eucalyptus coming from the floorboard creak and the diffuser in the hallway. I heard it at that point. She spoke in a way I didn't recognize, clear, harsh, and vicious. Really, Saul? No. In fact, he believes those children are his. Is it possible? He still doesn't know after 15 years. We say that all the time, you and I. He is the epitome of a fool. I went cold. She was giggling on the speakerphone. A vicious chuckle that echoed off the walls, full and uncensored. It had been years since I'd heard her laugh like that. Not in my presence. Perhaps never. Like a statue, I stood there. In my hand, the tea is getting colder. My ears are thumping with my heart. I held my breath. Didn't flinch. I had the feeling that my body was no longer mine. The door to the kitchen was ajar. I could see her sitting in her robe on the island with her toes painted red and her legs crossed. She laughed once again, as the man spun her phone line around her finger. Saul whispered that if I ever found out, I would look like this. Her response: please. He still believes that our trip for our anniversary was unexpected. Remember how I was with you that night? I backed away cautiously, slowly, 1 foot at a time, as if moving too quickly would cause the floor to collapse beneath me. I didn't yell, I didn't interrupt, and I didn't drop the chai. I didn't insist on knowing the duration, the reason, or the type of monster that could do this to someone who had given them everything. Rather, I went out. I sat in my car and left via the front door as silently as I had entered. Merely sat there, still warm enough to cause the cup lid to fog. I set the tea down on the passenger seat. I looked at my hands after that. They trembled. I couldn't stop them, but I wasn't sure if it was anger, grief, or both. 2 homes, 15 years of raising children, and innumerable evenings spent clutching her hair as she wept over her sister's cancer. There were thousands of times when I believed I was creating something indestructible. In a narrative she told her lover to make fun of, I was now just a simpleton. I refrained from crying. That probably caught me off guard the most. No cries were broken, no tears were shed, and no dramatic yells into space were heard. There was only a numbness that permeated every limb from my chest. A chilly silence that schemes instead of screaming. I stayed out of the house. Instead, before things became too hectic, I took the car to the lake, where we used to take the kids to feed ducks. I parked with my back to the ocean and absorbed the quiet. Until the sun sank beneath the trees and the horizon darkened to a bruised orange, I gazed out over the ripples. Belle, my phone buzzed once, and asked me where I had gone. I believed I had heard something. Was that you? I didn't respond. Instead, I made a new folder in the Notes app. I gave it the label Final Reckoning. I had no idea why I had chosen those words. Perhaps because this divorce wasn't going to be your typical one. This was not a narrative in which I confronted her and she sobbed, blaming it on loneliness or stress. No, this was not the same thing. This was such a profound betrayal that it changed my identity. Long after the children had gone to bed that evening, I took the car home. The light in the hallway was on. Belle had her legs tucked under her, while she watched a reality show on the couch. As if nothing had changed, a throw blanket was pulled up to her waist. She gave a small smile as she looked up. I needed some air, I answered, putting the chai cup in the trash without glancing at her. You didn't text. Is it a long day yet? You don't know. I went upstairs, kissed the kids goodnight, and stood in each of their doorways longer than usual, while Callie muttered something in her sleep about a school project. She nodded and turned back to the screen as if nothing had happened, as if my life wasn't lying in pieces on the floor she had just vacuumed. I didn't sleep that night. Aiden was curled up with a soccer ball. Rory had one sock on and the other in his pillowcase. Myra had her stuffed lion in her arms, and her thumb in her mouth. I had assumed that they were mine, but now there was a cruel seed of doubt that made it difficult for me to look at them without hearing Belle's voice echoing. With one arm draped across my chest like a snake, I lay next to her, staring at the ceiling as she breathed steadily. I remained motionless and silent, assimilating the weight of that betrayal. Each breath she took and each shift in the mattress, serving as a reminder that I was sleeping next to a lie. It was 3:17 a.m. The morning after hearing her phone call. I stood in front of the bathroom mirror and attempted to shave, but my hand trembled just enough to nick my jawline. I turned on the desk lamp, opened a blank page on my laptop, and wrote one sentence. The moment you hear the truth and choose silence is the moment you begin your war. I saved it and started to plan. The house was waking up downstairs, with toast burning in the kitchen, the mirror complaining about her socks, and Belle laughing, as if she hadn't broken my world 12 hours before. A tiny streak of red ran down my neck, but I didn't bother wiping it off. Instead, I just stared at it, wondering how long I've been bleeding in ways no mirror could show. I felt like a stranger in a house I'd built from the ground up, and after what I heard, I couldn't look at any of them the same way. I went through the routine like a ghost, dropping Aiden off at soccer camp, nodding along as Rory talked about his drawing, and kissing Myra's forehead when she handed me her cereal sticky fingers. Myra's pacifier and the inside of her hat were gathered, sealed, and kept in a drawer under my desk. The problem was that I didn't want to stop loving them, even if they weren't mine. However, I needed to know, so I started with hairbrushes. Callie's had enough strands to fill an envelope. The boys' toothbrushes were placed in Ziploc bags, labeled like a science experiment. This had been going on longer than I wanted to admit. So I called an old friend, Gavin, a college buddy turned ER nurse upstate, because I didn't want to send them in under my name. Belle was the kind of person who would check phone bills, browser histories, and mail logs if she suspected something was wrong. She was cautious and careful, even in her betrayal. He gave me a P.box and agreed to take the DNA kits on my behalf, after I told him I needed a favor without asking any questions. I ordered 5, one for each child and one for myself, and sent them off with fictitious names but real samples. I then waited, and those 10 days seemed to drag on longer than anything I had ever experienced. I hated myself for still needing her warmth, but I had to do my part because if I slipped, if I even hinted that I knew, she would disappear like smoke, and I wasn't ready for that yet. I went to work, went to board meetings, laughed at jokes I didn't hear, and made love to a woman I could hardly stand to touch. Not a match. None of them. You okay? Gavin texted me once when the results were in, but I didn't respond. Instead, I went to the closest park, sat on a bench by the playground, and watched strangers push their children on swings. I couldn't feel my hands, my mouth was dry, and the wind felt like it was turning against me. I didn't cry or scream. I just sat there and let it all bury me. I thought maybe if I sat still long enough, I'd disappear. Not even one. For kids I named, taught them to ride bikes, stayed up all night for when they had the flu, for birthdays, for Christmases, for sets of eyes that used to look at me like I was their world. Callie came out next, asking if we could get ice cream later. Sure, I said, my voice scraping out of my throat. Belle was in the backyard blowing bubbles with a mirror. She looked up and smiled as if she hadn't been involved in the gradual obliteration of my entire identity. I forced a nod. I arrived home shortly after sunset. Her smile made my stomach turn. We can go, all of us. Was she truly not mine? How could such darkness give rise to something so bright? However, the findings were unmistakable. The next day, I engaged Preston Vale, a discreet and pricey private investigator, and gave him a picture of Saul. I knew it was him when I discovered him buried in a folder from Belle's college reunion trip 5 years prior. I recalled her smile in that picture, casual, but not the kind you give an old friend. Rather, it was more like a secret, a treasured one. I told Preston everything, including where he works, where he lives, and who he talks to. I want to know which hand he used if he scratches his nose in public. He said, understood, and quickly took out a tablet. In less than 48 hours, I had a file on Saul Kendrick, the gym manager, who rented a duplex 2 towns over, had no stable job history until 3 years ago, and had filed for bankruptcy. This was the part that caused my vision to blur. He had a side business that provided wellness and lifestyle branding consulting services. And guess who his biggest client was? My company. 2 years ago, while I was overseas, RealL submitted the invoice, which was signed off with my digital signature. I trusted her with my money at the time, and it was only meant to be a temporary position while I found a CFO. It turned out that she was using my money to pay her lover. I looked at the fictitious invoice as if it would suddenly disappear if I blinked too much. But it was real. My wife, my business, and my money. And I was paying another man to play house behind my back. My hands clenched into fists on the table, and the paper's edges crumpled under my fingers. I watched her sleep again that night. Belle had always curled up to me in the dark, even when we were at odds. It was a habit of her body, not her heart. I stared at her, wondering what else she had stolen from me. Years of trust, now identity. I remained silent, instead starting to wall myself in brick by brick. Calm and quiet, I began putting the financial firewall in place, freezing joint accounts, transferring my savings to a secret trust in my cousin Malcolm Jr.'s name, creating a copy of all the documents Belle had ever signed in my name, scanning them all, and storing them on 3 separate drives. By day, I grinned and took Rory to karate. By night, I documented everything. Every movement, every inconsistency, every time Belle left the house wearing a different outfit than she claimed to wear to work, every unlogged charge on our account, every call to an unknown number. I helped Callie study for her biology test. I let Aiden beat me at FIFA, and I pushed Mara on the swing and told her I would always love her, even if she couldn't understand the weight in my voice. You'd be surprised at how easy it is to pretend when your souls are already numb. She wasn't just cheating. She was creating a new life, one that I was never supposed to notice, one in which Saul replaced me in a covert manner, and no one would notice. But now that I knew, I wouldn't stop until I made sure everyone else knew too. I still put on my blazer, smiled when I arrived at the office, drove the boys to school while listening to their ridiculous arguments about superheroes, kissed Belle on the cheek as she poured Myra's cereal, and responded to Callie's group text with emojis I didn't understand. But on the inside I was gone. I lived my life as if I were a visible but empty reflection. I had to do this because if Belle even suspected it, I knew the game would end. I wanted clarity, not conflict, tears, anger, or lies. I wanted to create the kind of truth that she couldn't escape. Not a fight, not a trap. Belle had been requesting a weekend cabin trip by the lake for months, but I had always put it off. The first thing I did was to play the part better than ever before. And I started organizing family nights once more, with game nights on Fridays and movie nights on Sundays. I think part of her thought I was trying to win her back, that I sensed something slipping, and was frantically trying to hold on to her. Good. Let her believe that. The next part was financial. I moved slowly, quietly, precisely. The kids were thrilled. She was surprised. She wasn't glowing or suspicious, just surprised. I rebranded the trust one had started under my cousin's name, hired a private legal team under the name of a subsidiary I had closed years prior. And then I moved assets. Not all at once, but just enough piecemeal, so that when the time came, she wouldn't be able to touch a thing. I also changed ownership of the vehicles, changed all passwords, banking, insurance, and even streaming services. The thing about a liar is that they assume everyone else is as distracted as they are. So when they start living double lives, they underestimate the people they're deceiving. They don't think someone like me could be quiet and dangerous at the same time. I told her we got hacked, and she hardly looked up from her phone. However, I had changed from the man she married to something colder, smarter, and more patient. I started recording. Not everything, but enough. Installing voice-activated microphones in my kitchen and office, a motion camera in the garage, and a call logger on the shared line because I didn't want to catch her in the act. The first clip I saved was a brief one of Belle laughing. No, he still doesn't know. I swear, Saul, he's like a golden retriever. He's just happy to be loved. Click. I stared at that file for a long time the night I took it. I wanted patterns, frequencies, dates, tone, and evidence that what I knew in my bones wasn't just emotion. It was a case. The more I listened, the less I felt. And that scared me but also focused me. I listened again not because I questioned what she said, but because I wanted to hear how casual she sounded, how simple it was for her to disparage someone who had spent the better part of his life creating a home around her. One evening while cutting steak, I told her, "I've been feeling tired lately. I'm burning out. Maybe thinking of taking a step back from the business." She perked up, and I was rushing for a moment too quickly. That might be good. At dinner, I began telling her small lies of my own. Nothing big, just a little seed planting. I could help again like before. Bingo! I acted as the exhausted provider, giving her the impression that she was powerful and useful, that her former role was coming back. I even gave her access to a fake duplicate of our financial records, where every login was tracked and every number was fabricated. She entered the illusion without question. I began going to the gym, too, not the spy, to be noticeable. I would walk in, not at the front desk, grab a towel, run a mile, and then leave. I watched her test the waters, sending small amounts, contacting Saul through a burner account I had never seen before, and whispering sweet plans to a man who didn't know I now owned the very gym he managed under a different LLC. I was the husband, the perfect idiot, she called me on the phone, and I wanted him to see my face so that when the time came, he would know exactly who had turned the ground to quicksand beneath him. However, the hardest part was the kids. I couldn't treat them any differently. I never spoke to Saul, and I never even looked him in the eyes. One night, Callie entered my office while I was staring blankly at a spreadsheet I wasn't even reading. I couldn't punish them for being born of a lie, and I didn't want to. I still gave them goodnight kisses, helped with homework, and cheered at games, but every time one of them said, "Dad," it made me feel raw. "Dad," she began gently, "how are things doing with you and Mom?" "You mean what?" I blinked. "Recently you've been kind," she shrugged. "Like very pleasant. However, you appear depressed." Slowly I shut down the laptop. "Sweetheart, people can be both. It takes effort to be kind sometimes." She gave a nod. "Do we still get to see Uncle Saul if you ever leave?" I was more affected by that than by all of Belle's falsehoods. I spoke steadily. "Why would you ask that?" "Due to Mira's claim that he permits her to eat cereal on the couch. Rory said that he permits him to remain up later. He's entertaining." I pressed my fingers into the armrests of the chair. I was afraid I could break my MERS because my jaw was so tightened. "He's merely your mom's friend." Flatly, I said. She gave a nod. However, I could see that things were moving. She was more intelligent than I had thought, and more intelligent than her years. Or perhaps I simply hadn't been interested in seeing it. Sitting in the dark that night with only one glass of whiskey, I reflected on identity, and how much of who we are is shaped by the tales we tell ourselves, and the stories we are told. I thought I was a spouse, a father, and a provider for 15 years. I had faith in shared dreams, love, and fidelity. I now had faith in strategy, leverage, and facts. I no longer donned the mask for her. It was for me. I wanted her to be surprised by what she saw when it was time to remove it. I became increasingly aware of the type of man Belle had choose over me as I learned more about Saul Kendrick. He seemed forgettable at first. Tall but crooked, slender yet unbuilt. He always wore clothes that were too tight for his small frame. About 30 minutes from our home, in Marshwood, he oversaw Iron House Gym. It was a simple sweat and weights facility with mismatched treadmills that creaked when you ran too fast and inspirational sayings emblazoned on the mirrors. I began visiting there once a week to observe and measure, not to confront him or to be seen. She had put our family at jeopardy for a man who was mediocre in every way. He didn't walk like someone with a goal or speak like a leader. He gave half-laughs, flirted with the younger customers, and gave unsolicited advice to those who were stronger than him. But I could see it through that thin veneer of confidence. The kind of desperation that drives a man to cling to anyone who strokes his ego. Belle had also turned into his source. My PI, Preston, had everything planned out. Location pings, phone logs, and pictures. During her yoga class hours, Belle would come see him 3 or 4 times a week, sometimes in the mornings, and other times around lunch. Always cautious, always dressed differently. She parked 2 blocks away, went in through the side, stayed for 40 to 2 hours, and then grinned and went out. Every visit I kept a file. The physical betrayal wasn't the only thing that stung. It was the strategy, the care with which she concealed it, and the obvious pleasure she derived from keeping up the double existence. I didn't recoil when Preston gave me a flash drive that included still photos of them, sharing a kiss behind the gym's rear door. Her eyes had already revealed the truth to me. This was merely a confirmation. Then, however, came the unexpected portion. One evening at the quiet cafe where we met, Malcolm Preston leaned back in the chair and slid a folder across the table and said, "You might want to take a closer look at this." The printed INVs were all under the name of Kendrick Wellness Solutions LLC, a generic consulting firm. I had never seen any of them, but they were all signed by me and approved by someone in my company. From where did these originate? Even though I already had the answer shivering down my spine, I inquired. Preston tapped your accounts payable department's documents. These are payments that your business made to Saul's fictitious corporation. More than $80,000 over 2 years. I had a constricted chest. That isn't possible. Yes, I would have. They were approved, or rather made by your wife. While she was assisting with finances, she turned in each invoice. Take a look. All delivered in batches, with the same typeface and wording. He indicated a signature box with this. A digital signature is that. Yours. I took a closer look. Though lifted and forged, it was mine. It wasn't simply the children she had lied about. I had been robbed by her. While I was abroad, Belle had utilized her position as acting manager of accounts and temporary CFO to transfer corporate funds to Saul. She had created bills for nebulous services like optimizing client lifestyle and performance plan. Each one was particular enough to appear genuine, yet general enough to get by. And she gave them the go-ahead using my own power. I reclined in the booth and gazed up at the gently rotating ceiling fan. It went beyond simple treachery. Laundering was involved. They were using my own business as a soft scam. Do you wish to file charges? Sipping his coffee as if we were two old friends catching up, Preston asked. Not yet, I responded softly. He agreed. I want every cent, every visit, every phone call to be recorded. Her and his devices are already being tracked. We've cracked the backups, but they're employing encrypted apps. Transcripts will be sent to you in a week. That night, I didn't get any sleep. From clarity, not grief. He believes that all she revealed on the phone was only the tip of the iceberg. There was decay underneath. Years of deliberate dishonesty, piling lies until our lives resembled a well-polished mask. She had misjudged me. She made a fatal mistake. People think you're weak when they perceive you as gentle. They assume you're naive when you're quiet. Belle was unaware that I had studied her ambition, learned her habits, and committed her tells to memory for 15 years. I loved her so much that I knew how she operated. I was now using that love as a template to destroy her. In order to prevent it from being traced back to me, I called my lawyer the following day and started a covert audit of the business's accounts using a shelf firm. We were getting ready for a merger, if anyone was curious. That allowed me time, cover, and complete access to all of the documents Belle had handled. In addition, I implemented internal watermark monitoring, manual reviews, third-party permission gates, and additional processes to our finance system. I would know if she attempted to shift $1. A report would be generated if Saul attempted to issue another invoice. I waited after that. I continued the game at home. As she was cooking, I gave her a shoulder kiss. I delivered flowers to her workplace. I organized a mountain vacation for the family. Knowing full well that night, I even got her a new bracelet and told her it brought back memories of our anniversary in Florence. She had been with Saul based on her call. She returned my kiss with a smile. No remorse, no moment of indecision, simply icy assurance. I learned all I needed to know from it. She wasn't impulsive or driven to cheat. She thought I was nothing, so she cheated. I wouldn't be aware of it. That I would never do something about it, even if I did. That I was some idiot too enmeshed in his allegiance to resist. However, she was mistaken. Malcolm the spouse was no longer me. She attempted to obliterate me as the man. I was going to remind her of the consequences of lying to someone who has given you everything. I believed I was ready for anything. I believed that nothing could be more painful than what I already knew after learning about the DNA findings, exposing the affair, tracking down the phony invoices, and seeing Belle go deeper into a performance of love she no longer intended. I was mistaken. On a Thursday night, it rained, the kind of gloomy, chilly drizzle that seeps into your bones regardless of how many layers you're wearing. As usual, I had picked up the children from school. In order to combat the weather, we stopped for donuts and waited in the car as Rory and Mira quarreled over the final chocolate twist. Callie was far too silent. She was always the quietest and most perceptive at the age of 14. She kept a watchful eye on everyone, particularly her parents, knowing that she would grow up with empathy and prudence in a world that rarely rewarded, either used to give me comfort. However, I noticed something different in her gaze that evening. Shame. Hesitancy. Yes, darling. If you and Mom ever parted ways, would we still see Uncle Saul? She said quietly, glancing at the foggy window instead of me. I didn't respond immediately, not because I didn't have an answer, but because every muscle in my body had frozen. What makes you ask that? I managed to say, keeping my voice calm, gentle. It's just he's around a lot, Callie said, shrugging, but I could see how her fingers twisted the edge of her sleeve. Such as when you're not there. Sometimes he brings a snack, aids Aiden with his schoolwork. According to Mira, he refers to her as a princess and permits her to watch cartoons that you claim are too loud. Additionally, Rory informed me that Saul had promised to take him fishing as soon as the weather warmed up. The world tilted. Just enough, just a little. He is referred to as Uncle Saul. I inquired. She gave a nod. Yes, he's incredibly sweet. But according to Mom, he's a family friend. Furthermore, I don't want us to have to decide between you and him in the event of an emergency. That's all. That's all. As if it were an easy idea. As if the same individuals I had centered my life on weren't tearing away my entire identity, layer by layer. For a while, I kept quiet and drove them home as the rain drummed the windshield like a slow, taunting metronome. Belle welcomed us inside the house with her trademark smile. As if everything were normal, she tossed a "How was school" across the room, helped Mira with her wet boots, and kissed my cheek. And the children, my goodness, simply strolled around the room as if nothing had happened. Because I sat in the garage with the lights off, the door closed, and the engine off that night after they had gone to bed. A storm roaring louder in my chest. Only me and the rain striking the ceiling. This went beyond simple treachery. This was a substitute. They had been silently getting ready for it. Slowly and quietly, Belle had been establishing the foundation, allowing Saul to become accustomed, amiable, and present. Her patience and the lengthy game she had been playing for years had outwitted me. Not because she was faster or more skilled. They weren't simply being unfaithful to me. I was being erased. It was similar to watching a house you've spent your entire life building get washed away by the ocean while standing on a beach. The saddest part is that nobody else notices the flood. As the foundation deteriorates beneath them, they simply wave and smile from the porch as if nothing is wrong. The heartache ended at that point, and a colder reality took hold. Returning indoors, I unlocked my office safe. There was an exit plan folder inside. It had been meticulously planned, legally exhaustive, and emotionally terrible, and it had remained unaltered for more than a month. I took it out and looked it over. The time has come to move things along. I informed my lawyer over the phone that we were proceeding with extraction, not with confrontation. Get the custody structures ready. I informed him that I was working for equality rather than fullness. However, I want protections, no sudden changes in the school, no parental alienation, and no new male characters. I want the judge to recognize this as a deliberate manipulation of stability and identity. He concurred. For weeks, we have been developing that case. I then called the estate planner and instructed him to take Belle's name off of all future access points and complete the property transfer to the trust. We transferred the emergency fund abroad, froze the company stocks, and altered all of the beneficiary arrangements. I provided him with a thorough analysis of Belle's financial misdeeds, the recordings, and the DNA results. He said, "Is this a divorce?" "Not yet," was my response. He whistled softly. You're not playing around. Neither did she, I replied. But I want everything ready. I want her to wake up one morning and realize the world she controlled is suddenly out of reach. The hardest part came next. I wrote letters to each child, not to be open now but years later, when they were old enough to comprehend without anger, without confusion, just the truth. I explained what I knew, what I didn't tell them, and why I still loved them after finding out they weren't mine. No DNA test could take away those moments from me, but Belle had tried. She had created a future in which I was only a wallet with a heartbeat, a stand-in until Saul could take over and become a real father, while I gradually faded into the background. Because they were not by blood, but by heart, by time, and by everything that mattered when they were small and afraid, happy or hurt. No, not me. I refused to allow that to occur, so I waited. Her birthday was approaching, and she had planned a lavish celebration. She naturally wanted to feel loved, adored, and powerful, and she had already begun organizing the guest list, the dress, and the music. I gave her the impression that I was thrilled, even suggesting that a private location be reserved for her coronation and execution. The bank transfers, the invoice trail, the text logs, the call recordings, the DNA results, the pictures of her and the duplex. I printed it all and uploaded it to a cloud folder with timed access links. With a single click, each person attending her birthday party would receive an anonymous message with a single straightforward subject line: the truth she concealed. I had already locked down every area of my life she used to control, frozen her out of the real accounts, hidden the assets, and had Preston install a hidden camera at the venue, because I wanted to immortalize the facade if I was going to burn it down. Sometimes the best way to regain power is to give it to them long enough for them to destroy it. But in order to complete what I had begun, I needed to give her the appearance of power once more. I needed her to think that I was weak, desperate, and spiraling, so I pretended to collapse. It began with a conversation over dinner about her favorite dish, sautéed salmon. I looked exhausted and stared at my plate for too long before she noticed. "You okay?" With just enough indifference to conceal the calculating behind her eyes, she sipped wine and asked. She put down her glass and said, "Rough how?" I nodded, then paused. "I got a call from the board. Things are rough. Real rough. Margins are tight. Investors are panicking. We might have to liquidate some assets to stay afloat. Maybe even sell the main office building." She blinked once slowly. "Wow," she said. "That's serious." That night, I gave her access to a fictitious accounting system. I wanted her to be the one to suggest it. Maybe I could help again. Hook, line, baited. I kept my expression blank. I wanted her to say, like before. I mean, I know I made mistakes, but I was good with the numbers, wasn't I? I allowed her to handle the payroll once more. And I watched as she went through the mock systems, correcting fictitious overspending, and congratulating herself when she discovered mistakes I had prepared specifically for her. It was an exact duplicate of the business dashboard, mirrored with fake data and dummy accounts. Every figure, report, and transaction was designed to appear authentic, while granting me complete control. She said to Saul, "Of course, I had the transcripts." Belle tells Saul that he is drowning, but Saul doesn't even see it coming. I think we should start discussing how to gradually phase him out, because he is currently fragile. I always told you that this day would come. Belle acknowledges this, but I don't want to scare him into acting hastily. I started planting more stories during the hunt, but it took all of my strength not to smash my phone in two when I read that. Instead, I smiled and said, "Thanks for stepping up." She kissed me on the cheek and said, "We're a team." Remember, a team is like a wolf and its meal. It was easy to maintain the mask when I told her that one of my biggest clients was threatening to back out, that I might have to lay off employees, and that I would be unavailable for a week while meeting with banks and trying to secure emergency funding. In fact, I was at my lawyer's office across town, finishing up the last details of the divorce plan and making sure that every asset I cared about was legally out of her reach. We sat on the back porch one night, with the kids finally asleep and the wind rustling the trees, and she leaned against me and sighed as if nothing was wrong. "You're going to be okay," she said softly. "I've been wearing it for years without realizing it. The hardest part was pretending I still trusted her and believed in her. You think so? I know so. You've always pulled through. You just need someone to carry the load for a bit. I wanted to scream and laugh, but instead I nodded, kissed her forehead, and thanked her for being my rock. I made her feel important, noble, and supportive. The noose was tightening behind the curtain, though, as Preston had gathered a master file that included every financial blunder, every visit to Saul, every incriminating audio clip, and even a deleted message in which she told Saul, "Just a little longer and it'll all be ours." The arrogance in that statement was almost admirable. As we drove back from Myra's school recital, with the little one still singing in the back seat, Belle said, "You know, I think we should renew our vows." She really believed she was winning, so I gave her one last chance. Not to confess, but to show that perhaps, just possibly, there was still a glimmer of humanity left in her. Slowly, I turned to face her. "Really? Yes, perhaps this fall," she said with a smile. "Make a new beginning. We deserve that, in my opinion. An examination." It was just that. I said yes. And I even promised to peek at venues to see whether I was still naive enough to ensure that the knife remained precisely where she had buried it in my back. She wouldn't know until it was served, but I wanted her to dream. So I filed the preliminary divorce papers under a sealed motion 2 days later. I wanted her to organize the vow renewal, pick the colors and the location, and smile as she walked straight into the end of her lie. To make it even more convincing, I even allowed her to throw her birthday party exactly as she had imagined. Without knowing that the accounts she was using were fraudulent, that the funds had tracking markers, or that every vendor she hired was already looped in, she spent a portion of the emergency business funds I had authorized for her to handle, hiring a caterer, sending out invitations, and renting out a lakeside event hall. Her dress arrived 2 days early, and I added another page to the party folder. Then, because betrayal likes to double down, she invited Saul as her guest, not in private, because she thought it would be good for appearances. When I unintentionally saw the invitation on the fridge, I thought, "We're showing Unity support. He's like family, right?" "Right," I said. Mara said, "Mommy looks like a queen." I agreed, picturing a queen stepping onto a stage made entirely of her lies. And I would be the one to pull the curtain. In the last week before her party, I hardly spoke, not out of silence but out of control. The gown was a sleek champagne color, with a low back and sequins at the hem. She thought she was walking into a celebration, but she was actually walking into a trial. Every detail was in place. The cloud folder was preloaded, the slideshow was ready, and time texts, emails, and printed DOSes were packed into sealed envelopes labeled with the names of everyone attending, including her parents, her boss, our closest friends, and the board members of my company. She also constructed the evidence herself. Belle's birthday came and went with a clear, cloudless morning, the kind of blue sky morning that makes you think nothing could go wrong. I sat by the window with my coffee and watched the children play in the backyard, their laughter resonating through the blank screen. The house smelled of vanilla lotion and hairspray, and Belle had been up since dawn, alternating between makeup tutorials and playlist revisions, perfecting the last picture of her life, while Mira chased Rory around the tree swing and Aiden and Callie argued over who would sit in the front seat on the drive to the venue. She felt that today was her chance, her prize, her stage, and everything needed to be picture perfect. "Baby, can you zip me up?" she shouted from upstairs, so I gently upped the stairs, inhaled deeply, and then pushed open the bedroom door to see her standing in front of the mirror, glistening in that champagne gown, her eyes lined in gold, her lips shiny. "Do I look good?" I smiled just enough. "You look unforgettable," she asked, turning slightly to show her back. Her scent hit me as I zipped the dress, sweet, pricey, and stifling. My fingertips touched the back of her neck, and I lingered for a half-second longer than I should have. She closed her eyes, leaned back, and said, "You've been so good to me lately." "I know." She turned, kissed my cheek, and whispered, "I really think this year is going to be different for us." I nodded, my heart steady, my mind colder than ever. "It will be." We arrived at the venue shortly after sunset, and the lakeside hall was festooned with string lights, lanterns hovering over the patio, and music already dripping from the speakers. I watched it all unfold with the composure of a man standing beside a cliff, knowing everyone else was about to step off it blindfolded. The catering crew moved like clockwork, and guests were arriving in waves, including her parents, friends, co-workers, and her old college roommates. Everyone was dressed to the nines, sipping cocktails and exchanging compliments. "He's an old family friend," Belle winked, introducing Saul to anyone who didn't know him. He was smug but controlled, wearing a navy suit that he probably couldn't afford without her help. Belle worked the room like a pro, giving him air kisses, warm hugs, and polished laughter. He had no idea I'd written tonight's script, and he was the star of the last act, and he flashed a smile that said he thought he belonged here. Perhaps he did. After all, he already had the loyalty of the child, the emotional upper hand, and the confidence of a man who thought he'd replace someone like me without resistance. At precisely 8:45 p.m., I went around shaking hands, saying thank you, and smiling just enough. I joked with the board members, posed for a few photos, and clinked glasses with her parents, who never really liked me, but who tonight pretended to do so. Let them have their fantasy. They would always remember this night. "Thank you for being here to celebrate someone so radiant, so beautiful inside and out," said Belle's hired event coordinator, as she tapped the microphone on the tiny elevated platform. Bilal called out, "Please raise your glass for the woman of the hour." The crowd erupted in cheers, and Belle slid forward, her eyes watering. I stepped up beside her, holding my glass high, and said, "Before we go any further," in a calm and warm voice, "this year has been a journey, but through it all, I've learned the value of loyalty, of growth, and of knowing who really stands by you when life gets tough." She waved a little, her hand over her heat. "I want to raise a glass, one that's long overdue." Belle smiled at me, and Saul clapped. I said, Everyone turned to listen to truth, pausing to look at her directly because it never stays buried, not forever. Then I pressed the button in my pocket, and all the phones in the room rang out. A wave of alert chimes sounded like a bell toll, soft at first, then becoming louder as everyone checked their screens. The air was filled with gasps and puzzled brows. Belle looked about, perplexed, and met my eyes. What is that?" she inquired, but I didn't respond. I took a small step back and turned to face the large projection screen behind us, and it clicked to life. Photo 1. Belle kissing Saul behind the gym. Photo 2 timestamped. "He truly believes those children are his. Just a little longer and it'll all be ours." Then came the DNA reports, lined up child by child. 0% paternity match. Then the fake invoices. Her smiling in his bed. Taken from the PI's Vanish. Audio clip 1. "He truly believes those children are his. Saul and I say it all the time. He is the perfect fool." Silence, not the stunned silence of confusion, but the suffocating silence of truth tearing through the air like broken glass. Followed by his business name, the transfer locks, the emails, her detailed plans to gradually move the kids toward Saul, her confessions to a friend about how comfortable, not exciting, I was, and her mocking messages about how easily I could be tricked. The final slide came. "Happy birthday, Belle. From the man you thought you could replace." The projector went black, and I gave Saul a sealed envelope. Belle's mouth moved, but no sound came out. Her eyes darted from screen to screen, looking at her parents, her friends, the board members, the caterers, and the people who used to smile at her. Now their faces were stone. His legs appeared suddenly weak, and he turned pale for a man used to lifting weights. He stared at it, as if it were going to bite him. "What the hell is this?" he asked, referring to a formal cease and desist along with a lawsuit for financial fraud, defamation, and business theft. "You planned this," she muttered, and I turned to face Belle, who was now shaking and gripping her stomach. "No," I said. "You did. Malcolm and the children are sleeping at home with a sitter, and they will be staying with me forever. I just gave your plans the audience they deserved," she said, taking a step toward me as the tears began to fall. I turned aside and walked through the astonished crowd, saying, "Please save it. You'll be served in the morning." Nobody made a move. Nobody spoke. Her father was flushed with embarrassment as I walked by him. Her supervisor gave her a blank stare. Her best friend noticed that she was already removing her name from a phone. He held the envelope as if it were a live grenade, remaining motionless. The air outside was quiet, serene, and chilly. For the first time that evening, I let out a breath and got into the car, adjusting the mirror. The reflection in the mirror was not a fool for the first time in years. Finally, a guy took back his stage and terminated the act. It detonated, but the party continued. I left before witnessing the entire fallout. I didn't have to. I knew exactly how each reaction would unfold, because I had planned the occasion so carefully. Preston, however, stayed. His camera glasses were filming everything from the minute I left, and he was sitting calmly in the back, posing as one of the event workers. I drank some whiskey and viewed the video later that evening. As the final slide faded to black, Belle remained motionless on stage, her mouth agape, her hands shaking. She searched for a door that was not there, looking around as if she were waking up in a bad dream. The first person to speak was her mother. As if it were poison, she hissed the name of her daughter. "Belle, is this accurate?" "Everything." With hazy eyes, Belle turned to face her. "It's not what it appears to be. Don't belittle us." Her dad lost his temper. "Are we blind, in your opinion? Is he blind, in your opinion?" I handed Saul the envelope, and he struggled with it somewhere behind them. His face dropped into surprise as he ripped it open and quickly read the lawsuit documents. "The word fraud," he whispered. Just before I left, Preston recorded me saying, "Malcolm, this is crazy. I didn't even don't speak my name again. You used it for too long." Saul attempted to defend himself to the closest individual, who just so happened to be one of my company's board members. I had no idea she was handling the invoices in that way. He begged, I swear. The dude didn't blink at all. "Our company's funds were used to pay your business. Those receipts were signed by you. As culpable as she is, so are you." He started to feel crushed under its weight. He stopped attempting to talk his way out of it, and it was evident in his stance and the way his shoulders slumped. Belle, on the other hand, was still on stage, still wearing a royal costume, but she was breaking down in front of everyone. When she eventually stepped down, her dress swung as she staggered toward her pals, her high heels clicking on the floor. She said to one of her bridesmaids from our wedding years ago, "Tell me you don't believe this," in a whisper. With her arms folded, the woman took a step back. In the video, the words, "I believed in you once, never again," reverberated like a door closing. The audience then broke up. There was only the quiet displeasure of people realizing they had been applauding a phony, without any yelling or shouting. Even the caterers packed things quietly, looking at one another as they wrapped foil and unused dishes. I stopped the camera and gazed at the still image of Belle standing by herself in the center of that exquisitely furnished room, with the lights above her sparkling and tears running through her makeup. Her expression was one of fear and incredulity. She never imagined that I would defend myself. Not in that manner. She always assumed that my composure meant I couldn't fight back. However, the storms that flood everything are frequently the quietest. By 7 a.m. the following morning, I had already arrived at my workplace, drinking coffee as the legal process got underway. It was 8:14 a.m. when she was served. I had made arrangements for a sheriff's deputy, an official, icy, and unavoidable person to deliver it. Marlene, the old neighbor next door who had always loved the children like a grandmother, was watching over them as they slept at home. A week beforehand, I prepared her. I informed her in case something urgent came up. She hadn't questioned, just nodded. She was the type of woman who observed everything, but kept quiet, unless it was absolutely necessary. My phone rang when I was in the middle of going over a vendor contract. Unknown figure. I let the voicemail go. Once more it rang. I picked up this time. Belle was the one. Her voice sounded as if she hadn't slept and her entire life had suddenly collapsed. Then she croaked, "Malcolm, I beg you not to do this." "You did it already," I said. "I'm still in front of my screen." "You embarrass me," she said. I muttered a little laugh. "No, Belle, you were exposed by me. You completed the remaining tasks. I need to speak with you face to face. There is nothing else I can say to you. I'm expecting a child." All around me, the room became quiet. I reclined on my seat and gazed at the ceiling. "That isn't feasible," I responded gradually. "Yes, it is." Calmly, I said, "I swear I had a vasectomy last year. Do you recall?" You couldn't accompany me to the appointment since you were too busy. Quiet. Then her breath caught a little. You kept it from me. I didn't have to tell you, so I didn't. I declared. You were now my opponent rather than my partner. I simply hadn't announced it yet. She broke out in tears. I hung up. I sent my attorney the tape and told him to get ready for a rigorous custody review. I didn't want to take any chances. Now that she had lost everything else, I wasn't going to allow her to manipulate the story or use the children as pawns. The tale of a well-known local business owner accusing a wellness consultant of fraud was discreetly and subtly picked up by the local news by the end of that week. Those in our circles didn't need headlines to fill in the blanks, but the names weren't made public. Following a formal complaint from my company, Saul was questioned by the federal government. They frozen his bank accounts. In a few days his gym shuttered. News spreads. But I heard he attempted to apply for a new job across the state. A man with a paper trail full of fraudulent invoices and LLCs was not sought by anyone. Belle, meanwhile, made an effort to rally people. She called her old pals, her parents, and even me. Nobody responded. Some people completely obstructed her. Her affair wasn't the only thing that shocked people. It was the years of deceit, the way she used love as a weapon, and how she subtly replaced me piece by piece while telling everyone she was the faithful wife. She was buried when her house of cards fell, something she never imagined would happen. When I went into Myra's room to see how she was doing 2 weeks after the celebration, I discovered her sleeping with her lion plush in her arms. I sat by her bed and brushed her curls from her forehead as she moved and muttered, "Daddy, I missed you." I whispered, "Princess, I never left." I wouldn't either. Regardless of what DNA demonstrated or what blood said, she would never again remove them from me. They were still mine. That morning, I stood in the kitchen with the same calm patience that I had used to take everything apart. Behind me, a pot of coffee was brewing as beautiful gold sunlight came through the window. When I heard the knock on the door, I had just cut an apple for myself. 3 solid wraps. Exactly on schedule. I took my time. I approached the door and cautiously opened it while maintaining a composed demeanor. A fully uniformed sheriff's officer was standing on the doorstep, holding a clipboard and a folded manila envelope. He said, "Mr. Drew." I gave a nod. The deputy nodded politely and entered without a fuss, saying, "She's inside." I heard her come down the stairs a few moments later. Her hair was untied, her shoes were dragging a little, and she was still dressed in her robe. She had obviously not slept. Her eyes were red-rimmed but stubborn. Her lips were parched, and she appeared pale. Then she caught sight of him. Her voice was harsh as she said, "What's this?" The envelope was held out by the deputy. "Mrs. Drew, you are being formally served. Please sign here to confirm receipt of the divorce petition, child custody proceedings, and attached documentation," she said, blinking. Twice. Over the pen, her hand lingered. "Malcolm," she said in a whisper. I said nothing at all. I simply crossed my arms and rested against the door frame. She put her signature on it. After giving her the packet, he turned to go. "You've got 30 days to reply. For the first hearing, your lawyer can get in touch with the court indicated here." She didn't say anything at first when the door shut. She gazed at the documents as if they were written in a fire. She then turned to face me, her mouth opening and shutting as if she was unsure of where to begin. When she eventually said, "You're really doing this?" I gave a nod. "Yes, I am." "All this time, you remained silent. Why didn't you simply come up to me?" I cocked my head a bit. "Would you have been deterred by that?" I paused, my lips quivering. "You had no right to reveal me in such a way." I chuckled. It was silent and resentful. "You also have no right to base your entire existence on falsehoods. However, here we are." Her eyes filled with tears. I didn't soften though. "Not now. Please don't do this to the children, Malcolm." "I'm not. You did it already. Now I'm just keeping them safe." I poured my coffee, sat down, and took a leisurely sip after passing her. She remained there for a while as though she was waiting for me to continue, but I was at a loss for words. I completed the house's last transfer the same day. 3 weeks earlier, the deed had been transferred into the trust. Nevertheless, the sale documentation now rendered it untouchable. Neither of us had ownership of the house. A holding company that I had established 2 years prior as a contingency measure owned it. Of course, she hadn't noticed. Why would she? A man she believed was too blind to defend himself had no motive for her to look up his records. The opulent SUV she had been driving was gone by Monday of the following week, repossessed due to a provision she neglected to sign. The joint accounts ran out of money. Shares of the company were frozen and transferred to silent partners. I had more faith than blood. She had lost every safety net she believed she had. She left me exactly what I gave her. Nothing. Saul had no better luck. He was scheduled to appear in court early next month. Documentation is linked to business theft, identity theft, and financial crime. It was stamped with his signature. With complete collaboration, my legal team had already gotten in touch with the Department of Justice. He was not allowed to leave the state after being identified as a flight risk. He reportedly attempted to crash at a friend's house before moving in with some cousins. The duration of each was limited to a few nights. Just as he had burnt through my trust fund, he had burned through favors. Swiftly, without regret. I noticed him across the parking lot one afternoon, while I was doing grocery shopping. He appeared unshaven and slimmer. He had wrinkles on his shirt. He knew who I was right away. And he didn't sneer or pump his chest for the first time since it all started. He appeared terrified. I made sure he saw me get into my car, clean, calm, and steady. And then I drove off without saying anything. I didn't go up to him. Belle's mother called me 2 days later. I allowed it to ring. Her voice was tight and harsh when she left a voicemail. We didn't know Malcolm. Well, we didn't. If we had, we would have. Please keep the kids in mind during this. They also require a mother. She should have raised a daughter who didn't use those kids as leverage if she really cared about them. Which is why I didn't give her a call back. For the majority of that month, I had the children with me. They simply clung a bit closer than normal and didn't ask many questions. On the first night, Rory crawled into bed next to me after having a nightmare. Quieter now, Aiden concentrated on his sketching. Callie was different. Mira kept asking when Mommy would return home. And I would always respond with the same kind words. Soon, sweetheart. But for now we're here. She observed everything. She had noticed the shift in her mother, in me, and in the air. I didn't push her, even though I could tell she knew more than she was admitting. She entered my office one evening, closed the door, and stood quietly by the window, shouting, I know Mom lied, she said. With heartache, I gazed skyward. She said, I heard things. Not everything, but enough. I want you to know I'm not confused. I swallowed hard, holding back the weight pressing behind my chest. You're not furious at me? She shook her head. You've always been the one to show up. So I'm upset with her for acting like everything was fine. That night, I sat outside under the stars with a blanket draped over my legs, a quiet stillness in my chest. For years, I had lived under the delusion that peace came from silence, from not stirring the waters, from being agreeable, supportive, quiet, but real peace. I reached out and she immediately stepped into my arms, and I held her like I hadn't seen in years, like a father who had finally been seen again. Peace came in bits and pieces, little quiet moments that felt like oxygen after months of choking. And it came in the mornings when I made pancakes while Mira sat on the counter swinging her legs. It came after the explosion, after the dust, after the lie had burned down to nothing but ash. And all that was left was truth. When Aiden asked me to play chess in the afternoons, and I let him win just to see his pride, when Rory, who used to sleep with the door open, began to close it again because he finally felt safe. And most importantly, when Callie began laughing again, her curls were a mess and her smile was sticky with syrup. The house itself had changed too. It was quieter, but somehow warmer. The air didn't feel tense. The walls didn't echo with unspoken resentments. I repainted the living room. And she laughed, not the forced kind, not the polite chuckle she used when things felt wrong, but a real laugh, loud, pure, the kind of laugh I thought I'd never hear in that house again. Belle insisted on staging family portraits every year, so I replaced them with new pictures I took of the kids baking cookies in the park and at the lake. No matching clothes, no forced smiles, just genuine moments. I didn't tell them what Belle had done. Not the whole truth. Not just yet. They would find out when they were older and could bear the consequences. They deserved to grow without that poison in their hearts for the time being. Belle continued to try to call, first daily, then every few days, but I didn't answer. Then she started sending me texts, saying things like, "Please talk to me. You're destroying everything we built. And they're still my kids." I was lost. I made a mistake. And we can fix this. However, she never once apologized. I remained silent, let the lawyers speak, let the process unfold, and she moved into a small apartment on the opposite side of town. I made sure the court knew about her mental instability, her manipulative behavior, and her financial betrayal. She didn't apologize because she didn't think she did anything wrong. She protested, sobbed in court, and accused me of turning the kids against her. But the judge didn't even bat an eyelid because the evidence was stronger than her tears. Saul, on the other hand, accepted a plea deal. We agreed on joint legal custody, but primary physical with me. She was permitted twice monthly supervised visits. I didn't want retribution through jail. I wanted his freedom to be a sentence, and I once passed him outside a grocery store. He was sentenced to 3 years of probation, financial restitution, and a lifetime ban from holding any fiduciary role in a registered business. He turned away, which was good. Let him continue walking. Months later, one afternoon, I discovered an envelope at the front door with just my name on it. No stamp or return address. And I opened it to unfold the one sheet inside. "You were always the better man. I was just easier. I hope they realize that someday. I hope you get better. I hope you forgive me." What was left of the note was folded and put in a drawer with the letters I'd written to the kids. I didn't sign it, but I knew her handwriting and her heart. Maybe they'd want to read it. Maybe they wouldn't. But I wasn't going to let her words rule my life any longer. "Dad," she said, pulling her legs up under her as she sat beside me on the porch swing one evening. "Yeah, do you ever miss her?" she asked. I didn't respond right immediately since the sun was sinking behind the trees, illuminating the sky with shades of orange and lavender. I paused and muttered, "I miss who I thought she was, not who she became." I ruffled her hair and said, "But I don't regret loving her. Because without that, I wouldn't have you." Callie nodded slowly, as if she already understood. She smiled, a little grateful, a little sad. "I'm glad you stayed." "I'll always stay no matter what," I said. That night, I stood in the hallway outside their bedrooms and listened to the sound of their gentle breathing. Fools get hurt, but they also survive, and sometimes they rebuild. I went back to work full-time a few months later, and my company was stronger than ever. Investors praised my leadership, and staff noticed that I smiled more and laughed more. For kids who didn't share my blood, for kids who shared my blood, fools believe in people even when they don't deserve it. One of the younger employees walked by me in the hallway and said, "You look different lately, happier." I smiled and said, "I guess I am." They nodded and said, "I hope I can handle my storms like that someday." And I left with something I hadn't felt in years: pride. This was not the fake laugh I used to keep people comfortable, but a genuine one from the belly, from peace. Not in my work, in my survival, in my stillness, in my quiet, patient, calculated strength. I simply smile when people ask me if I'm dating again, because I'm not in a rush, and I've come to realize that true love doesn't need to be sought after. It finds you when you're ready, after you've cleared the clutter and made room for it. For the time being, I have my family. I have my freedom and my truth. Occasionally, while I'm getting coffee or going through the grocery store, an old friend or acquaintance of mine will stop me and say, "I heard what happened. I'm amazed that you maintained your composure." And as there is nothing else to say, I simply nod. They attempted to laugh at me, erase me, and replace me. Ultimately, I emerged from the fire not scorched but with a brighter aura.